So let's go ahead and go to the Hall of Famer. He's yelling at his wife, I think, before we actually turn him on. I saw him screaming.
No, I'm yelling. That's Millie.
Well, what's wrong with Millie?
Because she raises hell. She barks for no reason.
Well, that's what dogs do. They bark.
I know that. Well, I know how upscale this program is, and I don't want to do anything to detract from whatever wisdom I'm able to impart upon you and the two powers behind the throne.
Hey, before we go any further, Dad, I got to ask you. We've got now, Casey McAllister, Paul Fritzner, who has done Xavier basketball, covered the team now for a couple of years, a student there, a lot of broadcasting, has filled in for Joe Sunderman, right? Yep. Many times. So Paul was at the Big East Media Day yesterday at Madison Square Garden in New York. And the topic came up. I'm going to let you take it from here, Paul, real quick with Marty Brennaman, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so yesterday, before the show, Thom and I were talking today about how yesterday at Big East Media Day, obviously there's 4 new coaches in the Big East. One of them is Thad Matta. And we were talking about Thad, and he said, no, Paul, that's Chad Matta. And I said, Chad Matta? He said, yeah, just ask my dad when he comes on. So, Marty, I would like to know why it's Chad Matta.
Well, my memory slipped. I know somebody referred to him one time as Chad. Who was it, Thom?
No, it was you guys when he was asked about it, and I'll refresh your memory. It had something to do with Charlie Lukin.
I don't remember that.
He referred to him as Lunkin.
Yeah, that's correct. He did. Yeah. So in retaliation, I constantly referred, and I would do that on the radio when I was still working. I would call him Chad Matta. And I did that purposely. Because if you don't know what Charlie Lukin is, and you've been around for a while, then you ain't doing your homework. And so I had to drop a Chad in as many times as I could, which I tried to make frequent. And that's the name of that tune, Paul.
All right.
So there you have it.
Just remember, if you interview him down the road, it's not Thad, it's Chad.
I'd love to get him on the show because I think everybody would agree across the board. And, Dad, obviously you called a ton of college basketball through the years, both in the Atlantic Coast Conference, University of Kentucky, the NCAA tournament for CBS Radio and Host Communications for years and years and years. I think we all agree that Chad/Thad Matta is an outstanding basketball coach, and he went through a lot of physical problems during the end of his tenure at Ohio State. I think the sport is better off with him in it.
Without any question. I think he's an outstanding coach. He's proven that everywhere he's ever been. And the Chad thing was just in good fun. That's all that was.
Yeah,
I mean, it was not based on any negative impression that I've ever had of it. I've never met the guy. And I think he's an outstanding collegiate coach. I think he's one of those guys who has flown under the radar for a million years in the wake of all the big names that seemingly hang around forever. No, I think he's a good coach, and I think the game is better off for having him a part of it.
So he's back at Butler. He was there and then came to Xavier, if I remember right. And then he went from Xavier naturally to Ohio State, where he had a good run at it. Took him to a couple of national championship games where they got beat.
Yeah, Greg Oden.
Yep. So the baseball playoffs, when we last met, we were still in Division Series play. We had Tom McCarthy on the program yesterday. You're a good friend of mine, longtime television voice of the Philadelphia Phillies. And
Good man.
Said, they've gone 20 years, or almost 20 years, since they were last in the playoffs. And, last time they were there is when Roy Halladay no-hit the Reds in that series back in 2010. So, closer to 13 years. But, he said to us, he said he thought before the Cardinals series that they were going to beat the Cardinals. He was totally convinced of that. He did not think they were going to beat the Atlanta Braves. Yet here they are. They sweep the Cardinals. They beat the Braves in best of 5. They beat them in 4, dominated the series. And now, Dad, up 1-0 in a league championship series. They got it going on.
They really do. Last night, Zach Wheeler was incredible. it seems like every step that they make up, this young man figures out a way to pitch better. He had a no-hitter into the fifth inning and lost the no-hitter by that time. They have a 2-0 lead as a result of the 2 solo home runs, the monster home run that Kyle Schwarber hit. And we all know that pitching is, if you buy into it, and I do, that pitching is what it's all about. Now, having said that, you will find teams at times that are loaded with pitching and simply figure out a way to stop hitting. And, of course, San Diego is outstanding as far as their offense is concerned, but the Philadelphia pitching shut them down last night. And when you've got Zach Wheeler to go with Aaron Nola, which is a big 1-2 punch, you got something going for you. And the other factor, and again, I go back to it because I think it's important in the postseason, whether it be baseball or basketball or what, momentum. And Philadelphia's got it going on right now. I mean, I'm sure they feel very confident no matter who they play, and that is always important. On the other side of the coin, you got that Houston club or that San Diego team that geared up and loaded up, not only in the offseason but prior to the trade deadline. Now this second game is incredibly important for the San Diego Padres, because I don't know what the numbers are, but I cannot imagine with the kind of offense they have that they were shut out too many times during the course of the regular season. They still now have to reach back and figure out what we're going to do here in game 2 to get this thing even at 1-1. So this is a huge game, I think, for San Diego, no question.
When you look at 2 starting pitchers, and you mentioned them both, and Wheeler, because of the way the division series played out, he got the start in game 1. Aaron Nola is their ace. He will start in game 2. And, when you look at 2 guys, although you and I both were in agreement, the New York Mets with the 1-2 punch of Scherzer and DeGrom, that they would have a distinct advantage in game 1. Scherzer laid an egg. The Mets stopped hitting, and they were done right away. When you've got those 1-2 guys, and I'm going to be very interested, Dad, because, look, I know people get tired of hearing it. You get tired of hearing it, but I can only hearken back to the last big 1-2 punch that I was around, and that being Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling. I got to believe that those guys go game 1, game 2. You bring back Wheeler in game 5 and Nola in game 6. I think San Diego, even one game into this thing, potentially is in big, big trouble.
Well, I don't think you can discount it. And once again, we always get back to pitching again. And I agree with that. With those guys that they can look at, Rob Thompson ought to be manager of the year in baseball, not just, whatever votes he got in the National League, with what he did to connect club up from Joe Girardi and getting those guys to play, whereas whatever approach Joe made was not the correct one with this bunch that they've got. And I agree with that. You have 1-2 punch. The key to that is, and you mentioned the Mets, is getting by your first 2 starts with those 2 hammers. Now, if the Phillies come they come back with Nola in game number 2 and they win that, well, now they're in Fat City. But they have to do that in order to make those starts in games 5 and 6, should it go, of course, this is a best of 7. To make those starts important, you have to win the first 2 behind the same 2 guys that you've got slated to pitch in games 5 and 6.
Yeah. You mentioned a manager of the year, and Thompson takes over for Girardi. And Tom McCarthy had a lot of very interesting observations to make about that whole thing. Philadelphia being such an intense kind of town. We know how that is. Often you hear about New York. I'm not sure anywhere is more brutal as far as fans getting on players' cases, media getting on players' cases than they can be in Philadelphia. And he said that Joe Girardi, and we both know Joe and love Joe. I mean, he's one of my favorite guys I've ever met in baseball, and I think he's a good manager.
I do too.
But he felt like that he was almost too intense, and all of it combined to create this very tense sort of feeling in the clubhouse, and that Thompson has changed all that. On the flip side, another good friend. I was just messaging with him after they won the other night, Bob Melvin. It's one thing to go out and bring in a lot of players, but I think it's easy to forget that their best player, and make no mistake, he is their best player, is Fernando Tatis Jr., who virtually did not play this entire season from injury and then getting suspended.
Well, I don't totally agree that he's their best player. For me, if I had to pick one or the other, I'd take Juan Soto, but that's another story. I think Bob Melvin's persona, Tom, is a carbon copy of Rob Thompson. He's a laid-back, low-key kind of guy who has the ability to get his point across. And I don't know that there's ever been a place that Bob Melvin has managed where there has ever been any talk about the players not liking him. Now, I don't particularly think that's the most important thing in the world. I've often said when you go back, and maybe it doesn't work today, when we look at the early 70s when Dick Williams was reigning supreme in Oakland and the players hated him and he didn't like the players and the players fought amongst themselves in the clubhouse, but yet they went out and won. I don't know that a manager like that can work today with the kind of players that have come along since then. At the same time, I think Bob, his resume would indicate that he's a guy that however he does it, the players respond to. He did it at Arizona. He did it at Oakland. He's done it everywhere he's ever been. And so I think these two guys approach their craft in essentially the same type of manner. Talent, irrespective of the talent, both teams are loaded with talent, and now we're going to find out. As I said, you go back to tonight. Tonight's a big game. Interesting to see if there will be lineup changes on the part of San Diego. I doubt it because these are the guys that got them there, and we'll go from there. But I think if San Diego wins tonight, this is going to be a big series, and it could very well go the distance. If they don't win tonight, they are in deep, deep trouble.
Your old friend, longtime friend. You knew him before he was manager of the Reds, and then you got to be very close with him when he took over and have stayed close with him and Dusty Baker. Here we go again with Dusty. He's led another team to the playoffs. He's led another team deep into the playoffs. They're in the league championship series. I think you and I both agree without a doubt that he should be a Hall of Fame manager, whether or not he wins a World Series or doesn't win a World Series. But it would certainly be the proverbial cherry on top. It would slam dunk his resume of getting into the Hall of Fame. And you're not sitting there in the office with him doing a radio show every day.
Yeah.
But do you think that through all these years, whether it was going back to the Giants, took them to a World Series, they lose to the Angels. He takes the Cubs to the National League Championship Series. They lose that series against the Marlins. Now here he is with Houston. Do you think that he has changed at all through the years in his approach, not necessarily day by day, but do you suspect that he would do anything differently in the playoffs than he's done his whole career this year?
This year?
Yeah, I mean, do you think that there have been lessons learned and conversations you've had with him through the years that might be something a little bit different, a little bit wrinkle in the way he goes about his business? Or do you think he's Dusty Baker? He is who he is. He's gotten to this point by being who he is, and we're going to keep doing it the same way.
I think he's essentially Dusty Baker. I used to tell him, Tom, when I don't know that the handwriting was on the wall, but it was enough of a concern to me personally when he was managing this club. And I would tell him, if I told him once, I told him 1,000 times. I said, you are so hell-bent on being a player manager, and you fall on the sword continuously. I said, don't you realize that they don't give a damn about you? That if you are fired, they'll turn the page and will have a hard time remembering what your name was. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be all about them. And nobody's going to come to the media and come to the public and chastise the organization for firing you because of what a great manager and person you are. He said, "You don't think I don't know that, but I am what I am, and I can't change it." I disagreed with him, and he got fired by the Reds. Whether you agree with it or not, I didn't. But I still think that the players turned the page. And when you have a player come out and defend a manager in light of his being fired, that is really a plus for that guy to make people realize how much they loved him. But I can't remember any player going in his defense when he got fired by the Reds. So I don't think he's changed a whole lot at all. But I desperately want him to win this thing now, because he, as you said a moment ago, all these idiots that may be part of the Baseball Writers Association, and they'll whine, "Well, I don't know whether I can vote for him or not. He's never won a World Series," which is the biggest bunch of crap I've ever heard. I think he's in the top 5 in all-time wins as a major league manager. And Gene Mauch, who way back in the 60s, when he was managing, and everybody, I know Sparky used to say when I came, he's the greatest manager in baseball. And I hear it and hear it and hear it. And I'm thinking, guys, never won a World Series. So is it nice to have in your resume? Without a doubt. Terry Francona has two. But I don't think that Dusty's changed a whole lot. I think Dusty feels like his approach to managing has stood him in extremely good stead, albeit with a number of different teams. And so I haven't seen any indication that he's changed a lot. Now he's got good talent down there. There's no question about that. When your stud is Yordan Alvarez, you're doing okay. And you got Alex Bregman at third base, and you got the rest of those guys around that ball club. That's a good team. And I think in the American League, you have the matchup that a lot of people felt would be the matchup when it came down to the American League Championship Series.
I used to get into arguments all the time with the quote-unquote analytics crowd out there about, you'd hear about Tampa Bay, and, they get to the playoffs every year. And I'd always say, yeah, they get to the playoffs, but they never win.
Never.
The one outlier in baseball that is a quote-unquote small market team that wasn't spending a ton of money, there's always going to be an outlier no matter what. And that was the Kansas City Royals. They won the whole thing. That's going back now 7-8 years ago. But I'm sitting here looking at the MLB team luxury tax payrolls. Okay? Yep. Mets, playoffs. Dodgers, playoffs. This is in order, by the way, of highest payroll. Yankees, playoffs. Phillies, playoffs. Boston didn't make it. Padres, playoffs. White Sox didn't make it. Braves, playoffs. Astros, playoffs. All but 2 teams. And the St. Louis Cardinals check in at 15th with a luxury tax team payroll of $170 million. The outlier this year making the playoffs, the Guardians up in Cleveland. Dad, you can't win unless you're spending big money in this sport. And because there's no salary cap, and I don't think there's ever going to be one because the players' union's never going to agree to it. But this is a spend money if you want to get to the playoffs kind of league. End of story.
It does, but on the other side of the coin, Tom, these clubs that are winning and that are in the playoffs or were in the playoffs when they began, not only do they spend a lot of money, but they also have a very strong analytics department. All these clubs do. I think the mistake that baseball is making now, I think the treatment that scouts got in the wake of the of analytics inundating baseball to the point that it did almost on an overnight basis, and all of a sudden the scouts were less important, was criminal. And I think the day will come. Maybe not in my lifetime, but it will be in yours and the 2 powers behind the throne there, Paul being one. Anybody sitting behind the camera and you dominating the camera all the time, they're the guys. I think you'll see the pendulum swing back toward the middle eventually, and scouting will become even more important. I used to tell analytics guys when I talked to them, which wasn't not very often, You can't tell me what's between a guy's ears. You can't tell me what's in his chest. And pardon the term, you can't tell me what's between his legs. Jose Altuve would not stand a chance of being signed and given a chance to play Major League Baseball today. But I'm getting off the subject. I know what you're saying. And I guess it's the old man in me that never took a liking to analytics. And I feel sorry for the broadcasters in the business today that are forced to talk about it and forced to like it. Whether they do or not is another thing, because I think it takes a Phi Beta Kappa key to understand a lot of it. And I'm not smart enough to understand a lot of it. But if you're going to work in this game today, and I'll tell a story that I don't think I've ever told publicly. But when Bob Melvin was managing Oakland, and the Reds were out in Oakland playing the A's, and he and we were friends for a long time and always respected him as a great baseball mind. And we were standing on the sidelines talking about the game itself and the analytics and old school and the clash of the two. And he said to me, Marty, let me tell you one thing. If you want to work in this game today, you better buy and fall in love with analytics, because if you don't, you're not going to find a job. And I believe that. I think there are a lot of guys that are working today that a lot of this stuff is contrary to what they believe in, based on their coming up and playing and managing in the minor leagues or getting to the big leagues and managing. That is contrary to whatever they've been taught. But if they want to work, then they're going to have to buy it hook, line, and sinker.
All right, before I let you go, prediction for the American League Championship Series. You go way back with Aaron Boone. He's navigated through that whole thing in New York. I mean,
thank God for him.
I almost would give the manager of the year every year to whoever manages and gets to the playoffs, if you're from New York or Philadelphia, because it's just insanity in both of those places, day in and day out, and the grind of the job. Now the Yankees outlast the Guardians. Garrett Cole has been spectacular in the postseason in his 2 starts, but he's got to wait. They had him warming up just in case in the bullpen in the 9th inning yesterday. And how about your boy, by the way, before I get a prediction, how about your boy Wandy Peralta?
Unbelievable. I mean, here's a guy that, I don't think you can look back on the time he spent in the Reds uniform with a lot of pride. But I'll tell you one thing, the guy has matured and has been able to hang around the major league scene for a long time. And his finest hours have come in that series win over the Cleveland Indians. He pitched 3 or 4 days in a row.
Yeah.
And was as sharp last night. I mean, it was 3 up, 3 down. I mean, one runner reached, I guess, against him in the 9th inning. But he was spectacular. And I'm happy for him. He's a left-hander. He's got his act together, and God bless him for appearing the way he did.
Well, heck, we all saw, because he did have a lot of good moments with the Reds. It became an issue like his 2nd or 3rd year where he couldn't throw the ball over the plate, and that's what got him in trouble. But his stuff has always been really good. All right, prediction, all right. Astros v. Yankees. What are you expecting?
Well, the thing that Yankees have hanging over their head in this series is that they faced the Astros in 2017 and lost. They faced the Astros in 2021, and Jose Altuve had a walk-off home run in, I guess it was the 6th game to clinch it again for Houston. So the history would indicate that the Astros have an edge over the Yankees, and they're still, obviously, the players that played last year for New York are the same players essentially, with some changes this year. I'm going to go with Houston, because I'm betting tonight that Justin Verlander will not have the kind of start he had in his last outing, which was so poor, giving up 3 or 4 home runs, that I was concerned about whether or not he was healthy. Obviously, he was. He had a bad game. You expect a lot when that guy goes to the mound. I'm betting on. I think the Astros have a better rotation. I think they're deeper in their rotation, and also I think they have the edge in the bullpen. And so we'll see what happens. But I'm betting on Houston to win that thing. I don't think it'll go any less than 6 games. It could very well go 7, but I think Houston will win it and be in the World Series.
All righty. Well, we thank you as always every Wednesday with the Hall of Famer Marty Brennaman. You know, our big interview today
is with who?
The Cowboy.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, be sure and tell him I said hello. I didn't hear very much from him during the season. So tell him I said hi.
I will.
All right, pal.
Well,
enjoy
the rest of your day. We love you. I'll talk to you later.
Love you too.
All right. See you. Marty Brennaman, kind enough to join us.